on this week's Bet the Process podcast, which is sponsored to you by Novig, the best sports betting prediction market in the world. Just go to Novig and put the code BTP in, and you'll get a nice bonus. And you can see some of the great markets that we put up over the year. Something like Jackson Dart. Oh, Jackson Dart, if you'd gotten into that not to win the offensive, player of the year or whatever, you'd be in great position. Or if you gotten any of that Texas Tech and Texas A&M to win the national championship, you'd also be in great position. So go check out Novig. And we also have this week on the sports law professor, Gabe Feldman, to talk about everything sports law, sports gambling, and NIL. So with that, let's start the process. Welcome to another episode of the Bet the Process podcast. It's a special Thanksgiving episode. Rufus is in Maine, I assume?
I'm not. I'm in Alexandria, Virginia.
Oh, there you go. I forgot where you're really from. The DMV. The DMV.
DMV.
So Bet the Process heater continued last week.
How did we do last week? We need to
you
check
didn't even
this.
know? It was 3-0. You were 3-0.
Did we go 3-0 again?
Yeah, you went 3-0.
What's our record for the year? Somebody needs to put this together.
I know. I mean, it's good. I mean, I was like 4-0-1 on the Kornheiser show. So my record on the Kornheiser show is outstanding. So, and he asked me the other day, he goes, so why do you think you do so well in college and just so, mediocre in the pros? And I'm like, because I literally just tell you Rufus's Bet the Process heater picks. But you did have a great week last week, so I'm assuming we somehow selection biased ourselves.
No, I had a good college football week.
Okay, so you continue with the college football year.
Have been great this year. They really have. Like we've not done well on totals, but we've done very well on sides.
Yeah, well, we give you guys the best stuff. Any things you want to talk about before we go into the Bet the Process heater? Because we actually have a really interesting guest on today. It goes in a different direction than we usually do with the sports law professor, Gabe Feldman, and we talk everything from NIL, which is like a fascinating thing to talk about. And then we go into obviously a lot around sports betting. But is there anything you want to talk about before we get into
that? No, it's a long interview. It's a really good interview. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, so do you want to give people the Bet the Process heater picks?
See, we're still getting stuff filled today, so hopefully this doesn't come out too soon. And we probably are going to be moving some lines also, so that's another potential downside to this.
Well, we will make sure we don't launch it. We'll give it a little bit of a break to get out there, so you don't front run yourself. I'd hate to see that happen.
I'm gonna pick a game with a major team again, and I'm gonna take the Penn State Nittany Lions. Again.
Ooh, were you on them last week?
Was I on them last week? Who did they play?
Against Nebraska, 7.5 is what it closed. I was like curious about that because I looked at that line and I was like,
I don't think so.
Because your logic seems so sound on that, and then you had the fact that like, so your logic was sound, and then they beat the crap out of Michigan State. Although I guess that game was close for a while. So
no, I actually had I had a Nebraska position at, I think it was at 9. So, and then that closed, 7.5 maybe?
Yeah.
Did not win.
Got it. So you like Penn State minus 12 against Rutgers?
Let's see. Right now, the unabated line's -11, -107. It's 12.5. 12.5 most places. Circa still has 11. Bet online 12. This is as of 4:37 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Monday.
Yeah.
So we will go with that. I'm
scouring the globe for other ones.
Well, I'm scouring the list of plays that we sent and trying to see things that haven't really moved yet.
And also, you got pretty much full fills on.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if we didn't get a full fill, I don't really want to. It's not really one that I want to give out. Okay, I'm going to take the Virginia Tech Hokies.
Ooh, James
in a
Franklin.
rivalry game.
Not James Franklin's not really there yet, but that's fine.
That number, was 10.5. It is now 10 at most books. An unabated line, vig free line is Virginia Tech plus 10 -101. So I can say right now the consensus is plus 10.
And
I'm going to scour the globe for one more.
All right, I love it.
We need it to be a good game.
Virginia Tech, Virginia is fun. I mean, just imagine you're sitting at home. These poor people are with their families, doing all the things that Thanksgiving brings you. You want to give them some winners.
Okay, my third pick is going to actually not be a big marquee game. It's going to be the Battle of Louisiana. Louisiana Lafayette versus Louisiana Monroe. And we are going to take Louisiana Monroe plus 10 and a half points. And I
Love
will
it.
double check to make sure that is still the line. And
10 and a half it is
looks
still.
like, yeah, 10 and a half. It's plus 10 and a half minus 114 a bookmaker.
All right. Those are the plays.
Those are the
And
plays.
now I forgot we're even still recording, which we are technically. So we're going to welcome in Esquire Gabe Feldman to the Bet the Process podcast, and we'll talk to you guys all again next week. We now welcome in Gabe Feldman to the Bet the Process podcast. Is there anything we should put in front of Gabe Feldman? Is it like sports law professor, the honorable? Like,
Doctor.
is there something,
You could
doctor, mister?
all of the above. Professor is fine. Director of
Okay.
the Tulane Sports Law Program is my title, but I don't. You don't need to put an.
Do you have a
honorary title.
PhD? I assume you have a PhD. Oh, no,
I
you
do
have a law
not.
degree.
Law
Professor.
professors do not need PhDs. I have a
Oh.
JD. I'm a Juris
Oh.
Doctor, not a.
Are there people with JD PhDs?
There are.
Oh, but their
also-
PhD is not in anything law related, right? It's a different discipline usually.
Right. There is a doctorate of laws that very few people have, and there's no real reason to have it, other than for those who want next level academic theory. But most people do not have it.
Can I call you barrister, or is that not? That's not applicable.
You can call me Esquire.
Esquire. There we go. Esquire. Okay, so you are in the world of sports law, right? Which I think has probably changed a lot over the last 5 years in terms of what that means and in terms of the places that you can go with it. I'll start with a very broad category, which is, we are a sports gambling podcast, but what is the area of sports law that you find the most interesting right now if you were to sort of sweep it into a bunch of different categories?
Well, I'd say the hottest issues right now are around college sports, and that's been the case probably for the last 6, 7 years. I didn't mean to do a 6, 7 there, but 6, 7 years. And
It's hard not
it's
to.
primarily around antitrust and labor and intellectual property issues. But we're also obviously seeing over the last 6 months to a year sports gambling issues wreaking havoc in the NCAA as well. But my focus has been traditionally antitrust, labor, intellectual property issues, contract issues in sports.
I'll touch there because I'm curious about the NIL stuff really in terms of like where do you see that going from a regulation standpoint? Because it seems pretty much like the wild, wild west right now, right?
Yeah, it's been reined in a bit through the recent settlement of the House case. And so there are now rules in place where it's really designed to look like the pro sports model, where schools can pay up to 22% of a defined category of revenues. And that's about $20.5 million a year. That's supposed to be sort of the salary cap part of it. And then athletes can do their own NIL deals, just like in the pros, but those NIL deals are supposed to be legitimate deals, not a way to circumvent the cap. So we obviously seen a lot about cap circumvention allegations with the Clippers. That's the model that the college sports world is trying to create, that let's let college athletes do what every other college student can do. They can make money off of social media appearances using their name, image, and likeness, but it can't be a way to just send more money to the player so they will stay at a particular school or transfer to another school. So there are more rules in place. The question is, how well can those rules be enforced? But that's where we are right now.
I mean, how well do you think those are being enforced? Because it just seems very difficult, right? Ultimately, because you're not talking about
Well,
millions of dollars necessarily to make these people happy. It could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you'd be fine.
Yeah, it depends. So the rosters, and we've seen, we don't have great data on this. It's more reports from the people who are paying the money. But reportedly, Texas Tech right now has spent about $40 to $50 million on their football roster. So a couple $100,000, yes, is meaningful, but the overall dollars are bigger than that. They are more sort of professional salary. But the mechanism that's in place to try to govern all this is what's called the College Sports Commission, which came out of that House settlement. And it's an agreement among the Power Four schools, and all the other schools basically had to sign on, that this new entity is going to be responsible for determining whether an NIL deal is legitimate. And then if it's not legitimate, what the penalty, if any, will be. And so it's this new enforcement arm that says NCAA, it didn't really work when you were the enforcement arm. So we are now bringing somebody new in to try to do this, provide the athletes with more rights, with more due process, but also make sure that there is strict enforcement so you don't have a school spending 2 or 3 or 4 times the amount of the cap. There's also, we can talk about this later, but one of the big differences between college sports and pro sports historically is pro sports with their closed leagues, they try to, in theory, get as much competitive balance as possible so that on any given Sunday, any NFL team can win, that anyone has a chance to win a championship. In theory, if not every year, at least every few years. College sports, particularly college football, that's not been the case. It's the typical same 10, 15, 20 schools. So they're not really trying to achieve the same type of competitive balance as we see in pro sports, but they are trying to at least rein in some of the costs so you don't have boosters across the country spending $30, $40 million to attract 2 or 3 players for their football team.
How does the entity determine that's tasked with regulating this and enforcing this determine whether a deal is legitimate? Like, let's say you have a booster that owns a used car dealership, and are they looking at this? Car dealership does $4 million in profit per year. If they're paying this one guy $2 million a year, that just does that pass the sniff test?
It's a great question. So there are 2 main factors. One, they look to see if the entity making the payments has a valid business purpose, if they're actually selling a product that's available to the public where they would benefit from exposure and from having a spokesperson or someone endorse it. And the other one is that in general terms, it has to be within a range of fair market value. And it's very difficult to determine what fair market value is because usually fair market value is how much somebody's willing to pay for it. And if there's a local booster who really wants the starting offensive lineman to make an appearance at the car dealership, then in theory, they should be able to pay whatever they want. But they are trying to put, it's an algorithm. They have all sorts of factors. They've not released the specific algorithm because they don't want boosters to be able to game the algorithm. But the general idea is let's look at similarly situated, whether they're college athletes or pro athletes or just celebrities, how much would they be getting paid for that type of deal? It doesn't have to be to the dollar, but if you're paying someone $1 million for one autograph, probably say that that's not a legitimate deal, that that's designed just to funnel money to the athlete. And then the question is, all right, where do you draw the line? And I don't think they want to draw specific exact lines. They just want to make sure it's in a general range.
Well, when you think about that, like, offensive linemen in the NFL don't get big endorsement deals because they're not like household names. And so if you have some offensive lineman getting this big endorsement deal, it's not like it's Brad Pitt or somebody that can actually move the needle.
Right. Well, what's interesting is comparing though, because if you had a pro athlete in a New York team, you would think they're going to be worth more because they're in the biggest market. But in college sports, New York is one of the smaller markets in terms of value of the teams and the players. It's Tuscaloosa and Baton Rouge and Athens that have the bigger markets that are willing to pay more. So again, they are going to try to say, look, if you're an offensive lineman and you're going to do one ad read for this one company, you can't get paid $1 million because that's not a legitimate NIL deal. So they're either going to have to give them more volume of deals, or they're going to do more group deals, or what's more likely to happen is that NIL money is going to go down. And in theory, it's replaced by that revenue share money. So the athletes are still making significant money, but some of it's more transparent that we're just paying you a share of the revenue that we make. And then go ahead and do your NIL deal, but we're not going to allow boosters and collectives to basically decide who they want to come to the team. And, I would talk about when we were in the true Wild West. Imagine, pick your favorite team. I'm a lifelong Jets fan. A group of Jets fans get together and they each contribute $5 million to a pot and say, all right, we're going to use that $50 million to go after the top quarterback. And the GM says, wait a minute, well, I'm over here. I'm the one who decides the roster decisions, and the boosters say, no, we're the ones who have the money. And for a while, college sports was like that. They're trying to move away from that to at least give it some semblance of sanity and some semblance of based in reality and consistency.
This all makes me think of Buddy Garrity, the used car salesman on Friday Night Lights.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Gabe, can you summarize kind of, I guess, briefly how we got here and what were the challenges to get here from the old model?
Yeah, how we got here is that the NCAA had two core principles for since its inception, and those principles were designed in part to differentiate it from pro sports. Because if you look at in our sports landscape in this country, we as fans only want to watch the best. And if a second league forms, we either will not watch that league or we'll say, you know what, there are some good players and good teams in that league, but you guys should merge so we can just watch one product so we can have a clear champion. But if it's a minor league sport, we don't tend to want to watch it. The only exception to that is college football and college basketball, where the numbers are massive. And we know they're not the best players in the country. We know they're not the best teams. They're not the top 50, 60, 70 best teams, right? There are minor league teams that would be better than them. But the NCAA has argued the reason college sports are so popular, two things. One is they are students. Right? They attend class. Two is that they were not paid based on their athletic ability. And that meant they weren't paid salaries to play and they weren't allowed to use the value they developed in their name, image, and likeness based on their athletic ability for payment. And the NCAA said successfully for decades that if you allow athletes to be paid, that will destroy the unique product of college football. Fans will stop watching. And then eventually, in the last 6, 7 years, as television contracts grew, as coaching salaries grew, as the next renovation on the $100,000 capacity football stadium was spent, people said this seems a little unfair that the dollars are skyrocketing, but the athletes are getting the same, which is their athletic scholarship. Not that that doesn't have any value, but it's not based on the market. It's not based on what people are willing to pay them. And so a bunch of states said, we think this is unfair. And we're not necessarily ready to say that college athletes should be paid to play like professional athletes, but at least give them the opportunity to monetize their NIL, like the college musician or the college actor. Why are we preventing them from doing that? And the states passed laws starting with California, then Florida, and once an SEC state passes a law that might give their school a competitive advantage, every other SEC state followed. So it took this country about 15, 20 years to get seatbelt laws passed in the majority of states. It took about 6 months to get NIL laws passed in the majority of states because every state wanted to be able to field the best team on their program. And then the NCAA continually got sued, and the NCAA finally said, all right, we will modify our rules. We will modify our definition of amateurism to allow college athletes to receive money for their NIL. They had to do it because the states were requiring them to do it, but then they decided to quote unquote voluntarily do it. And that's where we are in the position now. And then through another antitrust lawsuit, there was an attempt to break up any restrictions on college athlete pay. They wanted to say, look, if a school wants to pay an athlete $10 million, let them pay $10 million. That's what led to this House settlement where they agreed on this 22% rev share plus this NIL money. So that's the sort of quick and dirty of why we are and how we got to where we are today.
When you say they agreed to, who are the people that have to agree to this?
It's a good question because there's some debate about this, but the defendants in that case were the then Power Five conferences plus the NCAA. They're the ones who settled it, and they agreed to this new model. And the non-Power Five schools had the option to say, yeah, we're going to share revenue too, or to say, no, we don't want to share revenue, and we're going to stick to the old rules. And so some schools have opted out of that health settlement, are not sharing revenue with their athletes. But it was the Power Five conferences, the NCAA, that drove this and reached the agreement with the plaintiffs.
Wow. Fascinating. Rufus, anything else on NIL? You want to move to sports betting?
Well, I'm curious, had this case not settled, who would have been the favorite to win?
Well, the case is still going because some plaintiffs opted out of the settlement and said we want to sue. And then there have been some other plaintiffs that have continued to sue. And the continued lawsuits, and there's antitrust lawsuits facing the NCAA. There are athletes who believe that they should be declared employees. There are Title IX lawsuits. There are states that keep changing their laws. So the NCAA has said the only way we can operate, and pro leagues have argued this too, but the only way we can operate is if we are immune from antitrust law. You have to give us an exemption. So we're now seeing a battle in Congress, and there are two bills currently pending about what type of protection the NCAA should have going forward, because they're worried that the next time they agree on another rule or the next time an athlete doesn't get paid as much as they think they're worth, they're going to get sued. So we have a bill in Congress right now that might be voted on next week that would give the NCAA a broad antitrust exemption. It's probably not going to get bipartisan support. It's probably not going to pass through the Senate. But that's where the battle is waging, because the NCAA is worried we don't know that we can win these cases. Because people look at this system and say, why does the free market work for everybody else, but not for you? And why can Nick Saban make $10, $11 million a year, but their star quarterback can only make 3 or 4? So who would be favored? I don't want to put, maybe we could put this on Kalshi. We could do this on a prediction market, but the NCAA has been losing a lot of its cases in this area. So they recognize the great risk, which is why they're seeking this protection.
It's kind of funny that the one major sport that has antitrust protection, Major League Baseball, is the one that doesn't have a salary cap.
That is, I could talk for a long time on the history of Major League Baseball and how it came to be. Although they did lift the exemption with respect to the players, right? The Major League Baseball players. So the players can sue now. But yeah, they got their gains through old labor negotiations and going on strike and being able to stick together.
I actually took an American legal history course back in college at Yale and did a term paper on the antitrust exemption in baseball and the reserve clause. So
yeah, that's
a long time ago.
Is that a state school? I've not heard of that.
Small school in Connecticut.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Beat Harvard this past weekend. I was there.
We call it the lowest tier Ivy around here.
My wife went to Dartmouth. That's what I call Dartmouth. So we all have our Ivy League targets.
Yeah. Rufus, you want to jump into some of the sports betting questions you have?
Yeah. So I'm curious I have a bunch of these actually. I'm not sure which direction we want to go to first, but you mentioned Kalshi in prediction markets. What are the legal hurdles prediction markets
We should probably mention Novig, who's the sponsor of this podcast first before
Novig. Yes.
There we go. Now
they are well, we were going to get to sweepstakes too, but although they are in the process of trying to become a CFTC regulated exchange as well.
I mean, that's the dream of everyone, right? Anyone that's in the prediction market space should be thinking about the CFTC approval for sure.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so what are the legal hurdles right now facing prediction markets?
Well, I mean, the big legal hurdle is maintaining their status as solely regulated by the CFTC and not being considered sports gambling, to avoid all the state regulations, all the other regulations that are out there. And it is, I mean, I know you guys talk about this a lot on your podcast, and it's front and center in most sports gambling news, is whether they can maintain that different status and whether they continue to differentiate themselves, at least in the courts, and potentially legislators, as something different than sports betting. And we went through a very different scale, but with daily fantasy sports, the battle over whether that was sports gambling or not, whether that was a game of skill or a game of chance. And I'd be curious to hear your all thoughts on this, but the fracturing this is causing, and we've seen it now with DraftKings and FanDuel and the split, and how this could completely upend sports gambling in this country and the regulation of sports gambling. And there are enough issues with the regulation of it to begin with, but then to put it outside of those regulations in the CFTC could create a whole new set of issues.
Why hasn't the CFTC just come out and said, hey, mention markets, like prop markets, these do not have an economic purpose aside from gambling?
I mean, I think it's a complicated question why a current federal agency doesn't come out and say something. I think there are a lot of politics involved in that, and a fair amount of lobbying, and a little bit of goes back to the baseball exemption a little bit, pointing fingers that no, this is your role, states, and the states saying no, this is your role. federal agencies. So I think there is still a bit of a lack of understanding and a lack of clarity and difficulty. And this happened early on in the Kalshi days of is it different to predict the result of an election versus a sporting event? And Kalshi's outside counsel, at least at first, said there is a difference. That we're predicting events, not the outcome of sporting events. And then that all got lumped in together. So the question is, how do you make that distinction to make one subject to different regulations of sports betting, but the other only subject to the CFTC as these event exchanges?
Does it surprise you that the Kalshi has gotten as far as they have with this CFTC regulation, given like the landscape of the last, say, 15 years in prediction markets?
Yes, it does. It surprised me that they've been able to make these inroads, not only in terms of just CFTC, but just the sports gambling landscape and how regulated it is, and how much attention has been paid on it for this to just kind of emerge as a major player and to have so much activity on it, and to be able to go into states like California and Texas that don't have legalized online sports gambling and to promote themselves as legalized on online sports gambling. So yeah, I think it's pretty remarkable.
What do you attribute that to? Like, what do you think the biggest reason they've been able to do that is?
I think some of it is the shift, I think, in general around sports gambling and sports betting to be more permissive. I think 20 years ago, certainly before the PASPA was overturned, people viewed sports betting a lot differently. So I just think there was a willingness to take a different look at these sports prediction markets. And a fundamental question that people have asked for a long time is, why do we allow the public to quote unquote bet on certain things, but not on other things? And I also think the idea that you are doing this with another person, that there are two sides of this contract and it's not against the House, and there are not the same risks there, I think has allowed for more leeway. And then I think, again, a lot of political reasons underlying it. But we very curious to see how the American Gaming Association and all the other lobbies continue to respond to this and what pressure they put on, whether it's the states or Congress, because it's possible this might lead us to a national sports gambling law, right? Rather than what we have now, where it's pushed down to the states. And Supreme Court made pretty clear, it was only in one sentence, but they made pretty clear that if Congress wants to regulate it, they can regulate it. They just can't force the states to do it a particular way. So I think it's possible that Congress still gets involved to try to provide some uniformity around all this.
So, two questions. One, how much influence does the Trump administration have directly or indirectly on this? And two, what is the sort of timeline you see this playing out, and where does it play out? Is this going to eventually come down to the Supreme Court? And if so, like, how long will that take?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to the first one. I know what I've read, and that there's some overlap between members of Kalshi and CFTC and some other folks. And so how lobbying works behind the scenes, I couldn't tell you. I couldn't put a specific number on that. But if it does get to the Supreme Court, I think we could see this docketed, depending on which court it goes through, how long the appeals take. But you could, in theory, see this docketed next year and decide within 2 years. I don't think that's unrealistic. Again, I wouldn't bet on it, but I think that's certainly possible.
Now, how does it all unravel then? Like, is it going to take I mean, what do you think the bigger bet is? A state challenging it, or Congress weighing in?
I think it's more likely in the short term the states. I just think the states tend to be more nimble about this, and they're more directly impacted financially. And as you start to see more money shift away from state-sponsored sports gambling, I think the states are more likely to act. I still think we could see private lawsuits. I think there are a lot of avenues where this could end up in court and being challenged and head all the way to the Supreme Court. I would say that Congress coming to an agreement on this particular area is unlikely regardless of what the area is. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. I just think it's hard to get this Congress to agree on anything. And as with most things, when we're thinking about this in college sports too, it would take a crisis. It would take something that got the attention of enough people on both sides to say we have to act now. Otherwise, I just don't see it happening in the short term at the federal level.
Did it surprise you that DraftKings, rather than trying to challenge this legally, they basically said like, we'll just play with you and we'll join the band?
I think they learned their lesson from Daily Fantasy Sports or from others, how they respond. And they said, we're going to wait because we're not sure that this is legal and we don't want to operate in this gray legal area. And they got left behind. So I'm not necessarily surprised that they decided, let's shift and go where the money is, and try to balance it because they don't want to get left behind. They don't
They're
want all of a
only
sudden,
they're only doing this in states
Right.
that do not have legalized sports betting, right?
Right.
Can you explain that? And is that to protect their licenses and so
yeah,
they don't
yeah,
violate
because
state
they're
law?
just right because those states are saying no, we're not going to authorize this, and so they've got to go where they don't have to worry about the conflict between the legalized sports gambling in that particular state. Yeah, so they're doing it to try to kind of hedge their bets a little bit, so to speak, and do without worrying about the regulation that could come with it.
So right now, this battle's being played out in states, or I should say, I guess sometimes states suing Kalshi and other times Kalshi suing states
Right.
for preventing them from operating there. Is that correct? And
Yeah.
what should we be sort of, as people that are interested parties, be looking at when sort of following this?
Yeah, I think it's who else is joining these lawsuits. I think as with a lot of these issues, it may be the political power that is stronger or faster to act. And you all know how much lobbying goes on in the gaming industry. And I think there is also underlying all of this, and I think we'll probably touch on this, is the more the integrity issues come up in sports, whether it's college or pro in this country, the more people are looking for a solution to best regulate it, and both from a consumer protection perspective, but also from a league integrity perspective. And I think whoever is able to best come forward with a solution to win that battle is the front runner in all of this. And I think the more you can tie that into your legal arguments, where you can debate about how the law should apply based on the plain meaning of the language, but what's the policy answer? What's the best way to protect the consumers? What's the best way to protect these leagues? And people have different answers on that, but I think that's the next big thing that I'd certainly be looking for as we're dealing with all these integrity issues in Major League Baseball, the NBA, and college sports.
Can we move on to scandals, Rufus?
Yeah, let's do that.
So, in the last, I don't know, 6 months, have been presented with some real insider information athlete scandals. Obviously, you've probably followed a lot of them. When you think about these, how are they going to prevent these going forward? Is there a way for them to do it? Whose duty is it to do that? And I guess, how do you think through them? And, obviously we're talking about like the Chauncey Billups, Damon Jones, and Emmanuel Classes of the world.
Yeah. So as a lawyer, I have to say those are still allegations. Nothing proven yet. But in terms of bigger picture, whether it's Jontay Porter or some of the other slightly older cases, I do think there are two aspects of it. I think it is the consumer protection side of it, that what are we doing to protect the public who is gambling on these, and how do we make sure that they are not at an unfair disadvantage, that they're not being taken advantage of. And then there's the league integrity side and the integrity of the game, which is what we hear most about. And to answer your first question, can they prevent it? I don't see how you can prevent all of this from happening. I don't see how you could completely close off the possibility that there will be point shaving, match fixing, insider information. And with most things, we can look at other parts of the world. They've had legalized sports gambling for a lot longer than we have. Some would argue they have a lot stronger protections, and they have national protections instead of state by state. And they're designed, again, both for consumer protection and for integrity of the game. And yet you still see betting scandals pop up in other parts of the world. And so I just don't think there is a realistic way to shut it off completely, but there are certainly ways to provide more protection. And the ones that we've seen, and not all of them, but a lot of what we've seen are on the micro bets, the prop betting. And yes, I think you can significantly reduce those risks by significantly reducing the accessibility of those bets. And not saying you have to have a complete ban on it, but the lower dollar amount you allow, the stricter it is, the harder it is to place those bets, the less likely you are to see manipulation. But again, I don't think you can cut it off completely, because if they're not doing it on a legal sports book, then there'll be an illegal sports book that is offering these prop bets. And you guys may be able to speak more to this in terms of the history, but a lot of people are acting like prop bets just came about. There were no such thing as prop bets until sports gambling was legalized. And I know there are now more prop bets that can be made, and they can now be made legally. But there have been prop bets for a very long time. And the first one that I read about was whether William Refrigerator Perry was going to score a touchdown in the '85 Super Bowl, I think that was. And again, that was not what is the first play of the game going to be, or is there going to be a fumble in the first quarter, or is it going to be the coin flip going to be heads or tails? I know those are more recent, but my college buddies, not me, but my college buddies used to bet on the outcome of the coin flip and whether the first pass would be complete or not, 20 years ago. So I think the idea that prop bets are brand new is not quite right, but I understand that they are more accessible and they're offered in more places.
Well, micro
and so
betting.
it's easier to do.
Yeah,
The micro betting.
I think the micro betting's the big thing. You couldn't bet live on what the next pitch would be, whether it be a ball or
Right. The
strike.
live bet. Right. The live bet, but the first pitch bet
And the
is
parlaying of props.
right.
That was never a thing with
Right.
offshore sports books.
Right.
Because offshore sportsbooks are smart enough to not deal with those situations. Although it's like interesting, like they're not, it's almost like offshore sportsbooks weren't as predatory to go after people with these like lottery ticket type items that,
Right.
maybe I'm giving them too much credit, or I shouldn't go into that. So do you think, again, like, do you think that is there any answer to this, or is it's just one thing we're going to have to live with?
I think it's one thing we're going to have to live with. I think we can work on ways to minimize it, to reduce it. But again, I don't see how we can completely avoid the situation, as long as there are people who are willing to accept money or for either changing the outcome of the game or changing the outcome of a play or giving inside information. I don't think you can completely shut it down. And I think part of the question that's been debated is in the NBA and Major League Baseball, are these systematic issues or are these outliers? And if they are outliers, then I think, like in any situation, there's only so much you can do. That's why they're outliers. We can try to reduce the risk of it. We can try to better identify these things, and I think that would be more effective if we had more of a national standard and more information to work with. But I think the integrity agencies, from what I understand, do a pretty good job, and that's why we're catching anyone. But if there are athletes who are, and this is not the baseball and NBA situation necessarily, but tennis had a lot of gambling scandals.
Still does.
And what's that?
Well, it still has a lot of integrity issues.
Yes. But you can see why, when you have a single player, if you're playing singles, it's very easy for that player to manipulate the outcome.
Well, and if you look at the incentives, I mean, in like especially women's tennis, like the 200th best women's tennis player in the world is scraping by.
Exactly.
Just, faking an injury in
Right.
the second set is,
Right.
To get paid way more than she would make had she won that match or won that tournament is,
Exactly.
She's incentivized to make that, to take that offer.
Right. And that's been the risk with college athletes, and at least before they were getting NIL money, is that they were the most vulnerable because they weren't getting paid anything. And it would be easy to convince the point guard at whatever school in the middle of the season to throw a game or try to throw a game. And that's why the Black Sox scandal happened, in part, is because the players were making so little. So it was easy for them to be, or relatively easy for them to take that money.
So do you think if we raised the sort of minimum salaries in these leagues, I mean, because you like look at a league like baseball where players are
Yeah.
making the minimum salary for the first 3 years almost all the time. Then they have 3 years of arbitration before they hit free agency. So you have guys that are making, I'm not sure what the minimum is now, like 700,000, something like that, less than $1 million.
Yeah.
Those are the players who are more likely to be involved in these things, at least if you look at, from an incentive perspective. And same thing with Jonte Porter being, a D League guy on a two-way contract.
Yeah, but then how do you explain the Emmanuel Classe and Terry Rozier and these
Yeah.
guys that are making all this money? So I would agree in theory, the lower salaried guys or people are more vulnerable, but it doesn't seem to be limited to those. So yes, I think would it help? I think it might help at the margins, but I don't think it would eliminate it.
What about referees? Do you think, I mean, we haven't seen a referee scandal. Do you think we will? And how do we prevent that? Like,
What do you mean we haven't seen a referee
Well, since
scandal?
we haven't
Donaghy,
recently
since Donaghy, but yeah,
since Donaghy, which is
yeah, doesn't
how
feel
I
like it
got
was
started in
that.
this industry.
It doesn't feel like that was that long ago, though.
Summer of 2007.
Is that
I
right? It
was
was
doing
18.
internship at LVSC in Las Vegas and was tasked with looking through the line movements of his games.
All right, you don't have to make us feel old by saying you were
Makes me
in
feel
an
old.
internship, but yeah, I think that the I think there's an underlying theme in some of these, not to get too sort of theoretical or existential, but if we see a certain outcome or we see a player do something or we see a call made a certain way, our instinct often as fans or as gamblers is to say they're throwing the game. There's no way they would have made that play or made that call unless they were fixing the game. And is there manipulation going on by officials? I have no idea, but it is clear to me that in lots of cases, it's not intentional wrongdoing. They're humans who make bad
Huh.
calls, who make bad errors, who make mistakes, just like the players do. But the fact that that conversation continues and maybe is being amplified is obviously the problem for the league. Because as soon as there is any question about the outcome of the game, and even more so from the refs, because everybody already thinks the refs are out for them, then that's when it becomes a crisis. I do think there are, again, stricter measures you can try to put in place to police the officials and to police the refs, and you're dealing with a smaller population of folks, and you can put information restrictions. You can have all sorts of mechanisms you can try to do to minimize the influence of the official. But there, again, I don't think there's any way to completely eliminate it.
But is there do you think there should be some like framework like for insider trading in the financial markets has clear like you can read about what it means
Yeah,
like to have material information or whatnot.
right.
There is no such analogy for sports betting, right?
Well,
Meaning like is like okay, first I'll ask, is there such analogy for sports betting? And if not, should there be?
Yeah, Rufus, you were going to
I
jump
was
in.
going
Go
to ask
ahead.
if you mean sports betting or prediction markets, because I mean, prediction
Let's
markets
let's
are
start. Let's just start with sports betting, right?
okay.
Because prediction markets opens up a whole different thing, and
Right, and there is
that's not even like we're already talking. Like that's not. Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about just pure sports betting.
I want to do both, but okay.
Yeah, I mean, with predictions, though, that there is a whole other set of regulations that are designed to apply to financial transactions, so that should, in theory, be more sophisticated in terms of information sharing and insider trading. But from the sports side, some of it is league dependent and what the league permits or doesn't permit you to do. And so we saw, and I know we were going to potentially talk about this, but they've rescinded it. But the NCAA was going to start allowing college athletes to bet on pro sports because they said there's no inside information they have. There's no real risk here. And so why are we preventing them from doing this? But in terms of what they can and can't do as a college athlete and what you can disclose and can't disclose, I mean, there are criminal laws that you have to be aware of. In terms of the internal regulations, yeah, that they make it pretty clear about what you can and can't say to other people. And they try to be, they say they're clear, but they try to be broad that you can't give any information about the health of a player or whether a player plans to play or doesn't play. You can't share any of that information. But again, that's so difficult to monitor and enforce at the college level, where you have a college athlete who might have a roommate who's not on the team who knows that the player is sick or injured or sees them limping. And how do you don't really have jurisdiction over those students.
If okay, the roommate of a player got it. Well, let's say this roommate who saw that his roommate, the star quarterback, was limping and injured, and then made a bet on a prediction market. Would that be considered trading based off of material non-public information obtained through a special non-public position?
I don't think it would necessarily because I don't think it's the last aspect of it. I don't know that it meets that criteria, right? I think if you are working for the team, yeah. If you're a trainer, yeah. If you're a coach, yeah. But if
You
you're
just lucked into it.
yeah, yeah. I don't. You're not
You
using
just
your
went and
special
hung out on
position.
campus and walked around enough to see this person limping in a way that like was a weird gait.
Right. Anybody could do that, I guess.
Right,
Well,
right,
it's like the whole like hedge funds putting like satellites and seeing where, parking lots are fill versus not. They're just looking for data that no one else
right,
has, and that's the way they get their alpha.
right,
We need to set
right.
up cameras outside the team's locker room for when they players exit.
Yeah.
Have AI analyze if guys are limping. It'll be great.
Yeah, that's exactly what the NCAA wants to do now is put more restrictions on their athletes and more regulations on their athletes. That again, that people ask, well, why on earth would they allow? Why would they make that shift now to allow college athletes to bet on pro sports? Part of it was we got to treat them like every other college student on campus. And we don't want to be overly restrictive. Then they realized, as all this stuff was coming out, that maybe this is the wrong time to do this. We maybe, even if we
Read the
think it's the
room. Read the
yeah,
room.
right thing to do, it's the wrong time to do it.
Yeah. What do you think the biggest existential threat to legal sports betting is? Do you think there is such a thing, or do you think the genie's out of the bottle? It's never going to be illegal, and we just got to figure out ways to make it fair.
Yeah, I think there might be more friction. I think there might be more regulations in place. I think they might make it more difficult for the average gambler to pick up their phone and place a bet. I think they might restrict some of the prop bets, some of the micro bets. But no, it's hard for me to see them putting this back. And I'm not aware of any precedent. You guys might be where a country has had widespread legalized sports gambling and then have gone the other way and banned it. I know Australia has pulled back a lot because
UK
they've had
too.
so many issues. Sorry, what?
UK has adopted a ton of restrictions because
Yeah,
it was sort of the Wild West, and then
right.
there's a lot of problems that developed.
Right, but they've not banned it. Right?
Right.
They've not. They're. I don't think there'd be the appetite or the ability to do that here. But I
But if you
think
want to bet, you have to do an income verification check. You
exactly.
can only be yeah.
Right,
It's
right. That there's a lot more friction. That I use friction may not be the right word there, but
invasive.
yeah, it's just
A lot more
you have
invasive.
more barriers.
Well,
You have
but I mean,
to.
Friction is good,
friction
I
because
think.
ultimately, I'm going to ignore that, Rufus, because there's so many ways I could have gone with that. But
I'm glad.
the idea of it to me is that you have these companies that specialize in reducing impediments, like
Right,
increasing conversion, and
right,
and again, that's like this whole thing with like problem gambling is like you have these people that are so good at profiling people
right.
and they're profiling them for a whole different reason than wanting to profile them for problem gambling. And again, the
Right,
misaligned incentives is
right.
really one of the challenges
Yeah,
in this industry.
yeah.
Rufus, you got anything else? We've
Yeah, well,
kept him
I
for
want
45
to
minutes, so
I want
I
to
feel
ask
bad for him.
I mean, I want to tell Professor Feldman my sort of proposal and ask him how if this has any chance of being a reality, legally speaking.
Okay.
I think that sports betting operators should not have anything to do with responsible gambling. I think we should have sort of a central clearinghouse. I don't know if it's a private company, a government organization, a non-government organization that basically sees every bet that's placed from every account legally. They're sort of like the clearinghouse, and they profile and determine if there's problem gambling behavior. They are the ones that authorize deposits that say, do income verification and affordability checks. And the sports books are simply,
The
offering odds,
platform.
taking
Yeah.
bets, and ideally, the payouts, well, deposits and withdrawals would go run through this clearinghouse so that you don't have issues with a book like making it way easier to deposit than to withdraw
Right.
and all that.
Yeah, I think I like the general idea, and I think that that goes with having a federal framework as opposed to a state by state framework. And I think the state by state framework causes a lot of these issues. And so I don't know that you can do that without a federal framework. But if it is a federal framework, then yeah, I certainly think those types of regulations, and whether it's the books or a governmental entity or a new third party that's created, that's federally authorized or whatever it might be, that is able to do those things, to put greater restrictions in place, to be able to monitor it more effectively nationally, again, to be able to pick up on what these trends are. And to also, I don't think most of the gambling scandals or problems are because of lack of information, but I think some of them might be. I think there is some issue where there's just different rules depending on what state you are, what league you're in, whatever else it might be. So I think more uniformity is better. And again, more friction and even just the identification part. The from what I understand, Australia and the UK have much better or stricter mechanisms to make sure that the person making the bet is that actual person, and they're not using it to bet on behalf of somebody else. And so I don't know how realistic or how effective that is. Rufus, based on your reaction, it's not realistic or effective.
Well,
But
I mean, this is a problem because books limit players.
right, right,
It's,
right.
so they kind of bring it
But
upon themselves.
But if you limit it, but there's still a way, I think, and maybe we don't want to do it. Maybe all this other stuff takes care of the limits, that you don't need to limit the ones who are not the problem gamblers or have no nefarious motives and worry about the other folks. But I do think whatever the details are, that I agree with you that having some national regulatory entity and not relying on the books to do all of this would be a better system. Wouldn't be a perfect system because every system is going to have some problems and there's always going to be some of these issues, but I think it would be a better system.
But it would stop, like, right now a book has a clear incentive not to kick out or limit a problem gambler because FanDuel does it, they're just going to go to BetMGM or something.
Right.
It hurts them competitively, and a problem gambler is their best customer.
Right. Yeah, agreed. And that's why I think a national standard where you are sharing information and you either can be registered or not be registered, or you have a license to bet or not licensed. And now I don't know what effect that has then on the offshore books and illegal gambling and whether we're just pushing them into the unregulated environment where things could be even worse for them. I don't know enough about how the market works and how that. I don't know anybody knows enough about how those illegal books work now. But you guys might know, but I certainly don't.
No comment.
Well, I mean, well, the reality is with all of this, right? And like I'm hearing you talk about this, I'm hearing Rufus talk about this, and it's just like it's such a mess when it comes down to this because now we're introducing a whole nother
Yeah.
level of uncertainty with the prediction markets that are coming in and whatnot, and like we've just created this like again like the companies that we always and this is not like a shill for Novig, but I mean, we are very careful about who we work with. We've never taken a dollar from a sports book that we don't believe in as having some level of like the right thing in mind in terms of.
Wait, we've never taken a dollar from a sports book, have we?
I don't think so, but
No, we did not.
my point is like my point is like we don't take money from people that like again, like the word sportsbook has almost like become. I don't want anyone to call us contradictory. I mean, we obviously the gaming companies that we've taken money from are Splash Sports and Novig, and I think neither of them would be considered sports books, per se. But like the point is that we try to align ourselves with people that we believe are ethically similar to us in terms of how they think about this industry. And it's hard to find a sports book that is the case, right?
Right.
And that ultimately gets down to this challenge, and then you get down to like, if you went and talked to Jason Robbins about this, he'd say like, listen, I'm trying to run a business and
Right.
I'm trying to build a business. And it's like hard to argue with that at some point because all these things that Rufus that you're talking about, if it was federally regulated and all this kind of stuff, it would hurt, right? Because ultimately the federal organization would try to tell you got to take a certain minimum bet from everyone. You can't kick people out. They'd probably, like there'd just be a
Well,
certain level of like you telling them how to do their business, which would make it harder for them to run their business.
but here's a question, Professor Feldman. Does a sports book which is granted a license to
Esquire
operate?
Feldman, Esquire,
Sorry,
Esquire Feldman.
Professor Feldman, Esquire. A sports book which is given a license by the government to operate, and there's a limited number of licenses. Do they have an obligation to provide like a public service, like I don't know how to better express that, but
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. They some states require them to do it, right? So it's just if you are going to have a license, here's what you have to do. And there's talk about at the federal level where there is a tax on sports gambling. Most people don't really know about it, but about how to use that money and to require that money to be used to benefit the consumer and as to treat it as a public good. So yes, there are some requirements on the individual states, but I do want to say one thing before I forget. I also, just to be clear, do not take money from unethical sports books. I didn't want to make it seem like it was just you
excellent.
two, and I was out here just taking money left and right from illegal sports books. So just to make that clear,
Do you take money from legal sports
Ours
books?
isn't
I don't take
legal
money
or
from any sports books.
ours isn't legal or illegal. Ours is where we align ourselves, and it's
I
again
know.
like
I'm
it's
kidding.
our own objective. Rufus, anything else?
No. Well, oh, actually, maybe one more thing. And this gets back to, well, I guess rewinding a little bit, but the sweepstakes model, which Novig is currently in, that has been, well, banned in California. I believe New York might be doing that. And there's a bunch of states that have passed legislation making it illegal. Is that model going to be extinct at some point? How long until we see that? I mean, I know it's illegal in a lot of states, and will a lot of these companies be able to sort of build a war chest in the time before it's struck down in other states?
Yeah, I don't know about the war chest, but yeah, I do think the momentum is clearly. I think it's now what 6 or 7 states just within the year that have banned it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's also part of what we're seeing with the prediction markets. Not to compare the prediction markets to the sweepstakes, but that the traditional gaming industry and online gaming and you know tribal areas that are saying, wait a minute, this has been a highly regulated environment for a very long time that has been a relatively consistent source of revenue, and now we have people basically trying to do an end around. And so that's part of the reason why we talked about earlier. I was surprised that the prediction markets have been as successful as they have been, given sort of the the territorialness of this and the fact that they've had this ability to be the game in town if you wanted to do something like sports gambling. But you guys probably, well, Jeff, you might remember from the early days when Oregon had its sports lottery and
Yeah.
there was in those states other than Nevada that had legalized sports gambling, they didn't want it to be too much like sports gambling. They wanted it to be a little more like these lottery ideas. And they weren't particularly successful because people wanted to be able to bet on one team, not feel like they were just spinning a roulette wheel. No offense to people who play roulette, but I do think that again, I don't know if they'll be able to create a war chest, but it does seem like they are a dying breed, and I would be surprised if we see a big push to kind of sustain those in other states.
And is the difference, so Kalshi is able to say we're CFTC regulated, federal law preempts the state law.
Yeah.
Is the reason that sweepstakes companies aren't able to make a similar argument, because there's no regulation of any kind. So states are totally fine to pass whatever they want there.
Yeah, I mean, there's state regulation of it.
Okay.
So it's then the states deciding we no longer want it. Yeah. And there's all the same sort of consumer protection issues and addiction issues or problem issues and who is participating in these sweepstakes and these lotteries, not just these current ones, but historically.
Awesome. Well,
I guess, wait, any predictions on where we are in, let's say, 5 years with the sports betting / prediction market landscape?
I do think that we will have. It's hard to say when this is one of the most regulated environments in the country, sports gambling, and you kind of got like nuclear power and sports gambling are two of the top five. But I do think we are more likely than not to see a shift towards, Rufus, what you were talking about, where there's more uniformity. I don't. It's going to be a battle because the states are not going to want to give up any of their money. They're not going to, just like we saw a battle with Nevada and New Jersey. But I do think we are trending in that direction. And Adam Silver gets a lot of heat for the op-ed he wrote in 2014 that said that they should legalize sports gambling. But one of the really important things he said in there is he thinks there should be national regulation of sports gambling, that didn't want it done on a state by state basis because of all the issues that might pop up. And so I think you'll see more momentum towards that. And it wouldn't surprise me if the leagues rally around that to say, we can't put the genie back in the bottle, but we can make it a better, safer, fairer system for the consumers and for the sports fans and for the athletes themselves. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see more momentum towards that in the next 5 years.
awesome. Gabe, thanks so much for joining us. Fascinating stuff. Where can people find your work or follow your work?
You can follow me at my own podcast, SportsWise, a podcast about sports and the law, or at Sports Law Guy on all the different social media channels. Or you can apply to Tulane and take my classes.
There you go. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Bet the process.